Well, all right, Steve. Thanks for coming on. We had you on the Reconstructionist podcast, another podcast that I run. But when I was thinking about people I wanted to bring on, you were on like the top of my list. One, because I really enjoyed my conversation with you. But two, I love your music a lot. And so to be able to talk to you more about that is something that I love. But for those who don't know who you are, or maybe listening for the first time, can you just give like a brief, who are you? What do you do? What is Wolves at the Gate?
So my name's Steve, and I sing and play guitar in a band called Wolves at the Gate. Some people have called us a rock band, some people have called us hardcore, some people have called us metalcore, some people have called us hard rock. Whatever it is, it's under the umbrella of rock and or metal music. And so that scares some people, but I don't think our music is scary at all. So just check it out.
Just check it out. Well, and I've been a fan of yours for a few years now because you guys came to Youthquake, and it's like a little conference at the Bible college I was at in Kieranport, Saskatchewan. No one knows where that is. It's like around Moose Jaw. So if you know where Moose Jaw is, that's kind of where it is. And they just announced you guys, and I listened to some of your music. I was like, wow, this is incredible. I don't know how I've never heard of you, and all my roommates and dorm mates were like, what are you talking about? How does she not know who these guys were? I was like, I don't know. And so I've been listening to you guys ever since. And the cool thing too is at that conference, because it's like smaller, I guess, I was able to see you guys interact more than you usually would at a larger one, just because I was able to notice you. And the cool thing about you guys as a band is I saw you at like a hockey game and all these different things. Seeing how you interact and how you guys actually live on and off the stage was super, I don't know, reassuring, because you'd never know what bands are actually like. And to see a group of dudes who genuinely just like are trying to love Jesus and follow him was super encouraging. And so when I thought about bringing you on, I I wanted to, because I've kind of seen very briefly just kind of how you guys live your lives. And I think when it comes to the whole like kingdom man idea and what it means to be a man and also be someone who's trying to follow Jesus, I think in just watching and listening to your guys' hearts and how you guys live, that it seems like Jesus has grabbed a pretty strong hold of your lives. And so I wanted to ask you, just before we dive into some music stuff, for you and you following Jesus and being a guy, I was just wondering for you, like, how has Jesus affected and changed the way that you personally see like what it means to actually be a man or be a man of God, and how has that kind of affected the way that you like follow him and serve him?
Um, well, I guess first talking about the idea of being a man, um, we all we all grow up and are indoctrinated by um, pictures or examples of what masculinity is, what it means to be a man, and whether it's through our own upbringing, people we're around,
Mm,
um, entertainment, everything that we see. There's so many things that are kind of showing us masculinity, but not necessarily the right forms of it.
mm,
And so for me, it was a lot of unlearning things that appear to be masculine, but they're actually incredibly insecure. Um, you know, things that you think make you a man, like maybe being aggressive or um, masculinity. Like we really define it in a very small in a very small category, in my opinion. Masculinity to me obviously has a lot more to do with your character, and just because somebody doesn't cut down trees with an axe doesn't make them not masculine. There's lots of
yeah.
guys that's obviously I think to some degree, it's important for uh, any man to know what it is to work hard, but that doesn't mean you know um, tearing down walls and like doing
Mm,
you should know what it means to work hard to any effect, because everybody's going to work, and you're going to need to be able to work hard at your job and be diligent. And so but you can just see how quickly there's so many facets of how we've as a society have defined masculinity that really have nothing to do with what the Bible teaches us. Especially according to the world, being meek is not manly. but
Yeah.
Jesus was meek, and
Mm.
Jesus clearly is a man. And to me, that takes incredible strength. Um, being slow to speak. Sometimes we think being a man is being a leader and being the first to speak, or the first, being in front. Sometimes it's being slower to speak. Um,
Mm.
you know, um, sometimes using fewer words rather than more words,
Yeah.
because you've thought about what you actually believe and what you want to say. You know, coming to the aid of the orphan, the widow, and the oppressed. That's a call that the scriptures have on everyone. But as men, how we use our strength and whatever I guess position we have in this world to I guess, as we've seen, um, really essentially how Jesus lived. If we've seen that, then we should want to show that, to
Mm.
others. And it's not, yeah, it's just not always what meets the eye. There's like honestly, there's like so much you could talk about regarding that. But I had to learn I had to learn a lot of those lessons, and
Mm.
to yeah, honestly, a lot of it is just being humbled and learning humility. And uh, the only way I could really learn how to be a husband before I was a husband was to see how really Christ calls himself the bridegroom, and as the bride,
Mm.
he is a husband to his church, and how he has loved us despite how we've treated him. To learn how to be a father is to learn how God is a father to the fatherless, and how he has adopted me, though I was his enemy, in the way that he loves me as a father. So those two things, even just those two things in particular, have taught me an immense amount of what it means to be a man, because of the positions that you see, or the titles that God gives himself, because
Mm.
he is a father. He isn't just giving himself that name; he actually does the work of a father. And Christ isn't just called the bridegroom, a husband essentially, because it just sounds kitschy. He's actually doing that work. And so to
Yeah.
look in the scriptures and see, what does it actually mean? What does it look like for Jesus to be um, a husband? And as a man, it's weird for us to think about that, because it seems, feminine to consider
Yeah.
yourself as a part of the bride. You are. If you're a believer, you are. So just get over that, and and learn at the feet of the only perfect husband. And
Mm.
so that's where to me, you'll learn. You start there, you're not going to fail. Well, you'll
Mm.
fail. You're not going to fail to come to understand what it really is, but you're going to fail as a man for sure.
Yeah. Man, that's super helpful. I think, yeah, especially the whole idea for you of, which is what we are as Christians. We're like people who follow Jesus, but sometimes it feels like, I don't know, for some guys it feels like incredible to be like, yeah, what does it mean to be a man? Well, it means to be like Jesus. And it's like, whoa, like that means a
Yeah.
lot of things, and sorting that out and what that means. That's kind of because it doesn't fit anybody's boxes, I don't think, how Jesus interacted, where he's not just like, what it means to be a man is driving a truck and shooting guns, and it's not just like taking an authority and doing whatever. Like there's so many other things about like being meek, being caring, having compassion, like all those different things that it's, yeah, we'll fail, but
Yeah.
but if we try to do what he does, we won't fail. um that's great. So we've already, for those who are just listening in, we've done like a part one almost to this conversation in my other podcast that you can go back to and listen, where we covered a bunch of the songs from your guys' latest album, Eulogies. And it was great. And the feedback from that was awesome. And to be able to introduce more people to your music has been awesome for me as a fan, to be like, yeah, see, this band's awesome and legit. And you guys, I think just recently, I don't know if your wrapped up tour, I think you did, but you were on tour for a little bit. I think, were you with Memphis May Fire? Were you guys all just kind of going around doing that for a little bit? Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. We were out for 6 weeks with on Memphis's headliner.
Yeah, which is awesome because it was like two of my favorite bands coming together. So that was cool to see. But I kind of want to just dive into it because I love music deeply, and especially lyrics and all those kinds of things. I just find it super interesting, and I love this album so much that I'm pumped that I get to talk to you about it again and some of the songs we didn't get to talk about. And so one that stands out to me is "Peace That Starts the War," and I think it's just got such a cool concept that you'd have to listen to it to really grasp it. But it's so interesting how in the verses you go from like almost this accusation kind of voice that then gets drowned. And it's cool that on the like same word it changes and then it becomes like this truth saying that I just find is so
Mhm.
musically cool. And every time it happens, like something just inside me is like, yeah, this is awesome. And it even gives me just images almost of like, I don't know if that's what you were doing, but it just makes me think almost of like Jesus in the desert being tempted by Satan, and how Satan often comes with like this accusation and Jesus comes back being like, no, that's not what it actually says. And I'm going to take what you're saying and actually show that that's not the case for you. Writing that song and doing it, one, the concept is a really cool. uh I don't know, I've never seen anything like that where I just on that, like, yeah, it's just such a cool concept on that same word that just changed. Like, you'd have to, listeners, you have to listen to it to hear it. It's pretty, it's, I don't know, I love it. But for you, what inspired that song for you? What brought, because this album also is a more personal album than sometimes some of your guys' music. Not that it's not personal, but it is like, it felt like you were in COVID a little bit and having to deal with some of the reality of some of the things for you. So for you in particular, like, what brought that song out of you?
Um, I always appreciate songs that they feel like they actually fit within the realm of reality. Like a
Mm,
lot of times, I think um, Christian lyrics have tended to um, pretend as if they're living in a different world, and I like when there are songs that um, I'm listening to the lyrics and going, yeah, I know what that feels like, or I
mm,
helping me come to terms with reality. And for that song, you know, it's really the verses really are essentially kind of like what goes on in my head is that there's this struggle of the truth and the lie, and
mm,
they're often so close to each other. And so that's why I wanted to kind of use this idea of, because the lies that our flesh tells us, or the world or the devil or whatever it may be, there's always truth, some bits of truth in it. Otherwise, like, it's not just some crazy accusation. There's truth attached to it. And
yeah.
so I
Hmm.
wanted to use kind of that concept to kind of take the last word of the accusation and make it the first word of the truth. And so,
Mm,
um, really, it's almost like you don't give the lie or the accusation the chance to finish its thought
yeah.
and to combat it with truth. And that's where the chorus is really. It's essentially it's a cry. It's a cry for something that's not going to ever go away until honestly until death, until I'm glorified. But you know, um, that's what I want to be engaged in. It's really easy to become a sleepy Christian and become apathetic um, about. Yeah, it's just stuff I struggle with, and you give in and give up. And for me, the only reason why I have the ability to and the motivation to combat sin, and that's where the song title comes from, is that peace with God has been purchased for me and
Mm,
cannot be taken away. And so that's why everybody thinks in Christianity fighting sin is this pull yourself up by your bootstraps. God's not involved. He's not part of this fight. This is your battle. He kind of won the big war, but you have all these
yeah.
battles that you fight on your own. And that's not true, because the gospel itself, the war that was won with Christ defeated, I'm no longer a slave to sin. That's what I'm
Mm,
told as a gospel truth. The problem is that our flesh is weak, but that is the reality. And so, because I know that that has been won, I know that nothing can separate me from His love. No one can snatch me from His hand. I'm not. I know that even when I fail, um, it's not hopeless, if that makes sense. And so knowing that
mm,
I have that peace that Christ has done everything that I need for my salvation, I can go out and fight sin and not be afraid of being a failure at it, because my I guess my walk of sanctification is not like how well I do is not contingent on whether I'll be saved or not.
Mm.
And so that's what gives me peace, is that I could never do anything good enough anyway. And I know that my salvation is secure in Christ. And so um, I want to then like fight sin, cut me open till it all runs dry. Like that sounds terrifying to the world, you
Yeah.
know, take away the things that my flesh wants, but true believers whose hearts have been changed, and have new affections for God, like they want that.
Well, and I think you highlight a key thing too, that like Satan and accusations often have like truth in them, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
makes it, because he's actually a good liar. Like it's not just like he's making up crazy things no one would ever believe. It's like taking something that is true and giving it a twist, and to recognize, because even in the garden, like his whole thing was like, oh, like you're not gonna die, and he was right. Like it's like they're not gonna die instantly, but they will die eventually, and he still does that to this day, where you get accused like, oh, like you're condemned, you're sinful, you're messed up, you're a failure, and then for us to recognize and be like, yeah, you know what, I am messed up, I am a failure, and that's why
Mm-hmm.
I need a savior, and I can't do this on my own, and he's already paid for it. And even when I fail and fall, that I've got a God who has already covered the cost. Not that I just don't care and like don't try anymore, but it is that like I don't need to sit in condemnation. I can recognize like the war that's already been won, and like have this peace about it is like a huge thing. Because I know
Mm-hmm.
for a long time for me, I struggled with that kind of feeling of like you would mess up and sin and be like, what the heck, God must hate me and whatever. And it's like, no, that's not what the gospel is. To recognize that like the gospel is like Jesus has come and covered it and paid for it and like loves you and wants a relationship with you, and to live into that, and to yeah, have that voice in your head, um that makes all these accusations, and be able to like fight it off with truth. And yeah, you're right, we'll probably struggle with that until we die.
Yeah. Don't be deceived. You will.
Don't be deceived.
Yeah.
Another cool song, and this is the title track of the album, which I find interesting, is Eulogies. And the bridge and the whole thing, just like I don't know. There's something that music does. I don't know if it's everyone or if I'm just a weird person, where like you just like get chills and this weird feeling. They're like, oh, this just feels, especially lyrics, that it just the bridge gives me chills a lot. And in the chorus, you talk about how there's like a violent eulogy tearing your heart out. And you also chose as a band to make that the title track for the whole album. So for you, what is that song talking about? What is the violent eulogy, and why did you guys decide that, yeah, that when it comes to titling this album, that's what we're gonna call it?
The idea of this violent eulogy. So the song's actually about um, how the disciples must have felt when Jesus was crucified and was dead in the
Mm,
grave, and how they must have felt like everything that we, I guess, rested our whole life and our hope on is over,
mm,
because obviously they had a poor understanding of what Jesus had come to do. They thought he was coming to be a king to rule over Rome and to free them from their present bondage or
Mm,
physical bondage. Um, and I can relate with having a misunderstanding of what it is that God came to do and what life is about. Like, what is all this about? And so so the song is really, what we know is that Jesus met the disciples as they're walking on the road to Emmaus, but at that time they didn't know that Jesus had risen. They didn't. He was dead to them, and Jesus meets them on the road to Emmaus, and they didn't even recognize him.
mm,
And he basically explains the whole Bible to them, what everything has been about. That's when Jesus says, all of the law and the prophets, meaning the whole Old Testament, it's all about me. It's all been
mm,
about what I would come to do. And the disciples, after they, like, God, like, opened their eyes, they realized after Jesus left them that, wait, that was Jesus. And they were saying, like, when he was telling us all these things about helping us understand what the gospel really is about, weren't our hearts burning?
mm,
And I can just relate with that whole concept of, yeah, being distraught, not understanding, because that's what it seems like. It's just what is the death of this Jewish man 2,000 years ago have to do with, like, saving my life? You know, how does that? I didn't understand. Like, I knew Jesus was God, but I'm like, how does that all, like, what does that do for me? And so I didn't understand all of the implications of what actually happened in the same way that the disciples didn't. And so it just seems like this violent death. Um, how does that do anything? Um, yeah, to save my soul. How does
yeah.
that get rid of my problems? My sin. Um, and so, yeah, I tried to write the song in a way that it would kind of catalog that time period in their lives, and it kind
Mm.
of how it really felt parallel with my own story. Um, so
Yeah. Well, and it feels like that theme comes up a lot throughout this album of just the wrestle of what Jesus has actually done and what that actually means for us. And it is interesting to think about the disciples' perspective, because you think spending 3 years with Jesus that they would have some grasp on what's going on, but it's so funny that they just like are just missing it, and they're all depressed and like God's dead, and while we thought this guy was the dude, I guess he wasn't. And for Jesus then to show up and be like, hey, I'm going to show you that this whole thing that we've been doing is like the fulfillment of everything we've been waiting for, and for that to like click. And yeah, it's such a, the disciples are funny people. And the funny thing about the disciples is that we're the same way, is like we often miss it, and it takes us a long time before we actually see what God's actually up to. And it's so easy to like have our
yeah,
own ideas or agendas of what God should be or should be doing, and then to have him be like, no, let me show you actually what I'm up to. Is
yeah.
something.
You know what's kind of ironic about, let's think about just Peter in particular, and you were asking me questions about masculinity.
Mm-hmm,
Peter was such a great picture of false masculinity,
mm,
because what did Peter say to Jesus in the Last Supper? Jesus says, it, um, "One of you is going to betray me," and Peter's like, "Not me." Um, right? Like, that's what the masculine thing to do is to get. He told Jesus, "I will die, even if they all leave. I will die for you."
mm,
Right? That's what he said, and we think there's a degree to which, yes, boldness is an aspect of masculinity, but, like, zeal without knowledge is also just foolishness. That doesn't matter
Mm,
how quote unquote masculine you may want to sound. You're a fool. A fool's a fool. And for Peter, you know, Jesus says, "You're going to deny me 3 times." And Peter's like, "No way. No way." Pride, you know, you see pride and this boldness there. And there's a degree to which these are good traits or attributes, but they're misappropriated because he's lacking in wisdom, knowledge, and humility. And you look
mm,
at the difference in Peter, because Jesus tells Peter, he's like, Peter, I've prayed for you that Satan wouldn't sift you like wheat, um, um, and that your faith may not fail. And he says, and when you have returned, go and strengthen your brothers. So Jesus he knew that he was going to deny him, but he prayed
mm,
that his faith would not fail, maybe in the way in which Judas's did.
mm,
Judas, Judas couldn't bear the idea of what he had done. And that was a sorrow that led to death, not a sorrow that led to repentance. And, with Peter, you go on to see when Peter's standing before, like, the Sanhedrin on trial, he's not talking about how bold he is. They're basically telling him to stop preaching the gospel. And he's pleading with them saying, there's no other way, there's no other name under heaven by which man can be saved. How am I going to
mm.
say anything differently? He's not going, I don't care what you do to me. He's not talking about himself. He's talking about Christ. And you see how his tune changes. And really, to me, that's like those are the things that I want to resemble,
Mm,
because, you know, um, Paul talks about, um, the thorn in his flesh and how many times he prayed for it to go away. But he came to understand that through his weakness, God is strong. And so
mm.
he's realized to rest in that. But there's this degree of masculinity of we don't want to admit our weaknesses, and we don't have any. Um, and so when you ignore that, you're ignoring what God uses to actually strengthen you, which is his strength and not yours. And so, yeah, there's so much in that I think can kind of apply to, I guess, the heart of this podcast for you.
Yeah, no. And yeah, you touched on a ton of things that I think are yeah, Peter's an interesting guy. With just the and to see that change too, where he goes from even the guy who's just like when Jesus first is being taken away, he's like ready to go. Then he's like got the
Yeah,
sword out, he's cutting off people's ears, and Jesus is like, man, what are you this is not what we're doing. And
yeah.
and just to see him then in Acts and in the later whether it's his letters or in the stories later, just how much Jesus actually changed him and coming back, and the humbling too of when I think in John at the end when Jesus restores him, where he denied him 3 times, and Jesus gives him like 3 opportunities of restoration of like for him to confirm, yeah,
Hmm.
like that he loves him. It's just so cool to see. I don't know. It's encouraging to look at Peter because I know that if God loves Peter, then I'm probably okay. Where
Hmm.
he failed and messed up, and God was with him and wanting to walk with him, and so for us, it's super encouraging to be like, it's okay if you fail and mess up. That God's they're ready to restore you just as many times as you failed. Um, Another song on the album, titled "No Tomorrow," does like this thing. I don't know if it's like a real thing, but it's almost like sandwiching ideas that I find really cool in songs. You guys do a lot of things with lyrics that I really appreciate because sometimes I feel like lyrics are a lost art, and so I love that you guys put a lot of time and effort and thought into it. Because at the beginning you talk about this concept of like there's you have all of these sins, and it's like grains of sand, and it's in your hand, but you can't like control it, and it's overflowing, and it just feels. And then by the end, you come to this place of like where Jesus has now taken all of those things, and they're actually he like makes it his own, which I find so interesting that you say that like he identifies with it and also he like controls it. It's not overflowing, it's not unbearable, but he's in control. For you and that song and even that concept, because I find that for some followers of Jesus, the whole idea like the cross can be confusing when you start thinking about it, where it's like what really happened, what was going on. And I think that you highlight particularly in that song with that imagery, something really interesting and unique of what Jesus did. Um, and I just was wondering what inspired that for you, and for you when you're looking at that concept of Jesus taking our sin, controlling it, but also like the identification, like this is mine now, is for a lot of Christians confusing me. Like, what does that mean? And so, could you just unpack that? Could you just unpack the gospel, just real quick?
Yeah, I know. Well, there's in in Isaiah 53, one of the things that talks about the Messiah who would come talks about how he numbers himself with the transgressor. So he like that means he like counts him to be numbered with means like be like, yeah, I'm with this person. I'm with the transgressors. And what Jesus did was he it's this idea of it's been called the great exchange, where you trade places basically, like
Mhm.
we get all of his perfection and he takes all of our sin. And I think the idea of Jesus taking all of my sin, it, two things is something that I just cannot fully fathom, but two is something I want to continue to look at because it's a grace that's infinite,
Mm,
because our sin is against an infinite God. And so the grace that comes has to be infinite in that same way. And so for me, like, I just want to keep, I remember just sitting in church listening to a sermon, and I had that picture in my head of just thinking about, like, if you ever like grabbed a handful of sand and somebody said, tell me how many grains of sand are in your hand, you would be overwhelmed. You're like, I don't know.
yeah.
But then if you looked out onto a beach and they said, how many grains of sand are there? You'd be like, oh, I really don't know. That's what my sin felt like, feels like to me, honestly.
Mm,
The more that we really come to understand what it means to sin, this idea of sin becomes like this. We have like categories. There's no categories. It's just you failing to keep the law. If God says, if the summation of the law is loving God and loving others perfectly, we at no point in our lives have ever kept the law. So that means I'm a 36-year-old man who has never done anything that pleases God. That's kind
mm,
of like daunting to think about. But so you take that concept and put that in the light of the gospel and realize that's what Jesus took from me.
mm,
That amount of guilt, it's for me. And so that's where the idea of no tomorrow comes from. It's like, I there's no hope for me, you know, there's no tomorrow. Nothing's going to get better because I can't pay for this.
mm,
And, yeah, because I was trying to think of like what's like a term that sounds like there's no hope, but doesn't sound nearly as dismal as no hope. Because I wanted the song title to kind of be a little, I don't know, pull you in and
mm,
make you not quite sure what the song's about. And so that's kind of what inspired the song, is really just the ways that God has created awe in my heart for his grace and wanting to make songs that resemble anything close to that. So
Counting down my sins, each one a grain of sand that's filling up a desert as you hold them in your hand. You carry it away and bear it all alone. Every sin you've taken as your own.
yeah. Well, and you touch on that theme a lot, and you touch on that theme again in another song that I think is my favorite song on the album. It's really hard to pick one, and it's "Out of Sight." And I think this probably touches me in a different way because I don't know. This is something that I've struggled with as a believer. And so in that song Out of Sight, you talk about a similar concept where you're like asking God to come and actually take it away. And it's like that invitation part where in No Tomorrow, you're kind of describing almost like the cosmic reality of what happens. And then in Out of Sight, it's like the personal asking for that cosmic reality to become like actually real in your life. Where in the chorus, yeah, you're just asking God to come and take it away, that you can't like bear the thought of it, and take it out of sight and put it out of mind. Um, for you, with that, it seems like at the time of writing this album, that theme was coming up a lot for you. But for that song again, what inspired that, or brought that out of you? Especially, yeah, the like personal kind of prayer almost, and the concept of like having those things be taken out of sight and out of mind, almost like they can't like haunt you anymore, kind of in a way.
Yeah. So there's like two thoughts I feel like kind of inspired the song. One was um in Isaiah 6, where Isaiah, sees God, right? He has that vision where he sees God, and he realizes really how glorious God is, and that
Mm,
he shouldn't be there. Um,
yeah.
and so that's like the beginning of the song is you know, um, yeah, piercing eyes into a dark unknown scene, see what's hidden there. So it's like Isaiah was, he was a prophet already, but
Hmm.
God saw him as he is. So you think prophet, oh, this guy's great, he's wonderful. It's like God saw him as he is, and it's the dark unknown is my heart, right?
Mm,
It's God looking into my heart and seeing, you know, he sees me and I see him. He sees me and I'm a sinner, you know.
mm,
I see him and he's perfect and holy. And really that's kind of what Isaiah says. He doesn't ask for it to be taken away, but he says, he's like, I am a man of unclean lips, from amongst the people of unclean lips. Woe is me, right?
mm,
Um, but obviously, in light of the gospel, I know that there has been a way has been made so that my sins can be taken away from me, right? And the idea that God says that He remembers our sin no more. Um, I just I literally cannot understand, and I don't think anybody can,
mm,
because we can't do that.
yeah.
He's not like us in general, but especially in that way, because um, we hold a record of wrongs.
Mm, hmm.
We're told not to. We know that love doesn't keep a record of wrongs. None of us are really able to do that.
Yeah.
Even though you'll be kind, you still remember it, and you still remember the pain or the hurt or whatever it is. He remembers it no more,
Mm,
because Jesus took the punishment, and God is so perfect and just in what He does, that He doesn't remember it anymore. And that, to me, is such a beautiful reality in the gospel, is that um, He can see me the way that I am, and I can see Him the way that He is. And because of what Christ has done, it can be taken away and put out of sight. This idea of the scapegoat, all of our sin being transferred to the scapegoat, that was something that
mm,
the Israelites did, and they would send this scapegoat out into the wilderness to die. They were transferring their guilt. These were all just obviously shadows of what was to come with Christ, but it was something that God had them do to show them. And it's just crazy. And to me, it breaks my heart, because I just think, like, why should He have to suffer that for me?
yeah.
But He does that because He loves me, and that just breaks my heart in a different way, with joy and um, gratitude. And so, yeah, that's kind of what birthed that song idea.
Well, and I feel like you're right that that's a hard thing for us to grasp, because even though we know, like, I shouldn't keep a record of wrongs, like we
Mhm.
do, and I think sometimes maybe we fight it, but we often struggle with, if someone wrongs you, your interactions from that point forward, especially depending on how great the wrong was, is like hard to not constantly think about that. And just to think that for God that is not the case is mind boggling. Like I can't actually fully wrap my mind around what that means for him, where it's like, do you just like not remember, like what does that really mean? But it's crazy to see a God who is so holy and incredible and mighty and perfect and doesn't need me. Um, but he chooses to have a relationship with us to the point of like he's willing to die on a cross for it, because he wants to have that relationship, and that all of those sins and mistakes are things that he wants to take and like, yeah, take it out of sight and take it out of mind and never to have it come back. And yeah, because I think the Bible also talks about this concept of like he throws it into the sea and
Mhm.
it's like gone. And it's like, what a
Yep.
weird, it's just, it's so cool. And it's so backwards from how we operate as human beings.
Yeah, one more thing too is that I think is so important is that um, this is really a truth that I've been trying to learn to embrace is that he does these things because it's who he is. There's no
Mm,
God didn't wake up and decide I want to be gracious
yeah.
or I want to show mercy. He is merciful. He is a God who will keep no record of wrongs when it's been paid for. Like it's he doesn't have to try. Like all of these like
Yeah.
descriptors that we use to talk about, he doesn't have to try to do it. He is merciful and he is able to forget it because he in Christ paid for all of it. And so that like I love thinking about that that's who he is. Like you have a friend, you're like, yeah, that's how they are, and you love them for it. I want to love him for that in this way.
Mm,
This isn't calculated, it's not scientific for him. It's who he is. And it's just like people you love, family, friends, or spouse, or whatever, or your kids, or whatever, you love them for who they are. This is who God is, and this is why He's making Himself known, because He is that wonderful. That
yeah.
is who He is, and that's what I love, and I want to enjoy that more, and not think about Him as the God who decided to be gracious or decided to be merciful. He is merciful. That's what He does. It shows mercy,
Mm,
um, and that he actually is is desirous to show that, even though it's costly. You know, um, yeah, it's wild.
yeah. Well, yeah. And to think about that's who he is. Like it's such a, where it's like, he doesn't even like, that's just who he is, where it's like, it's crazy. And I think it's fitting that you guys end the album as we kind of wrap up to be honoring of your time, with Silent Anthem. And I think it's a killer way to end an album, for one. But the song talks about almost like the concept of what Jesus said to the Pharisees, where I think he was entering it, Jerusalem. I think that's what the context is. I hope I'm right, and I'm not wrong about this. And people are like singing his praises, and then people are like, "What the heck is going on? What are they doing this?" And the Pharisees get upset. Jesus says, "Like, hey, if they're not going to do it, the rocks are going to cry out." Um, and that song really touches on that. And then I think it's just such a cool way to end an album, where like for an extended period of time, like you guys are just shouting like "Worthy is the Lamb." It's just so cool, and such an incredible way to bookend that. And even to go back to what you said about Isaiah, just recognizing like, man, God is so crazy and good that like, just to like, if we're not going to shout it, something else is going to do it. So for you, one, what made you want to put that song at the end? And then two, like, what what inspired that one? Hopefully, I'm right about that story.
Yeah, no, yeah, you are right. And I think I think it has been hard for people to. There's no way that people could know kind of what inspired that song for us because a
Mm,
lot of what inspired the song is just the ways in which we've faced a lot of obstacles as a band,
mm,
and things that we've been told, and um, the the song kind of catalogs our history as a band, and I just used a lot of metaphor to kind of explain things that we've been told over the years about what we should or shouldn't do,
Hmm.
to maybe be more marketable or be more successful, um, and being a band together as long as we have been, it's just something that's always bothered me, and I just thankfully God kind of provided the right way for me to express some of that frustration where it's like this isn't what we do as a band. This isn't a gimmick like us talking about the gospel, talking about Jesus at shows. Like it's not a gimmick, like this is this is very real. It's not because
Hmm.
I'm a super Christian either. I don't think uh I don't think we're better than other bands because we do this. There are plenty of artists who are just as they feel a burden to tell the world to not eat meat or to
Hmm.
question their political leaders, um and so yeah, for us, really, we just wanted to write a song that kind of explains why we do what we do. um and that's what the chorus is essentially the summary of that. It's I hopefully it shows in how long we've been a band that what we sing about, what we talk about, who we are hasn't changed because it's
Hmm.
not a fad. We didn't make the music we made because um Christian heavy music got popular, and
Hmm.
marketable. It was the gospel that changed my life and changed my heart, and made me want to do what we do with the band. And so really the concept of it is like we've been, we've not gotten opportunities because of who we are as a band, and people saying stuff like we don't want a Christian band on this tour, or a band that talks about Jesus on this tour, or whatever. There's all sorts of stuff, and people they have the right to choose what they want to do,
Hmm.
but it's not gonna that's not gonna silence the song of heaven, right? The anthem of heaven. That's the idea of the song. Is um you know this is this song has been sung in eternity past and will be in eternity future, and it's not contingent on this small, heavy band. Like there are there are believers around the world who are proclaiming, the worth of the lamb, and God's using the truth of the gospel to change lives. And so it was kind of a way for us to kind of express we have no delusions of self-importance,
Hmm.
like um that's why, like the part of the song says we're not singing the song like it's fading in the background. Like we know it's not. We're just joining an anthem. We didn't create it, we
Hmm.
didn't make it up. This isn't our idea, this isn't our creation. We're just, you know we see what God has done, is doing, and will do, and we think um it's worth talking about. And so um yeah, that was there's like that's probably the song that has like the most mixed up into it of experiences and different motivations. And you know we've also had people tell us over the years, oh, you guys aren't as Christian as you used to be. And I'm just like, what the fuck does that mean? I was like, I'm like, if somebody in my church said that to me, I'd be concerned. But somebody, part of that too is for those people who are like, oh, you didn't say Jesus on this song, so you're not as
Yeah,
Christian.
yeah.
It's like, I'm like, those people will never be happy either. So
No.
yeah.
My heart still echoes the words you burned inside that are endless. The anthem of heaven. But if you silence the song, the rose will
that's also funny. I've seen people say that about different bands throughout the years, and it's kind of funny because I'm always like, "Are you reading the lyrics?" Where it's
Yeah.
if you're not just yelling Jesus the whole time, then you must be selling out. Because it's funny because every song you write is about that's funny. But I think for you guys too that like I think that genuineness comes out in your music and even in who you guys are on and off the stage, where it's like this isn't a gimmick. It's not just like, oh, we started a band when I don't know, when this kind of music was picking up, and so this is just what we're stuck with. Like you guys come from a place that feels genuine, and I think it comes out through your music and the way you get not that you're like super Christians, but that you can just tell that this isn't a gimmick. This is something that genuinely you guys care about and are like, this is what we do. And yeah, like you said, some people write songs about fight the power. Some people write songs about, yeah, I don't know, not, I don't know, hurting animals. And you guys are just going to write songs about Jesus because that's just what it's so cool. And to stay faithful to that when you know maybe we could make more money if we stopped, but we're not going to stop. It's like such a I don't know. It's an inspiring
Not
thing.
that much. It's not that much more money. Musicians don't make a lot of money, so
No, well,
it's
especially in the
yeah,
streaming world now, I don't think you make.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's just
Well,
it's definitely it's foolish,
mm,
and pander. You should want to make music because you want to be honest creatively and
mm,
lyrically, and so this is us being honest, and doing anything different would be disingenuous, and I think would make bad music anyway.
yeah,
Because I know writing lyrics already is so hard for me to do. I can only imagine trying to write lyrics about something I don't care about.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that would go. Goodness, please no.
It's like me in high school where essays I didn't care about, I was like, I can't write about this, and it'd be like,
Oh
why is your
yeah.
mark so bad? It's like I don't care about Frankenstein. I just don't. I'm sorry. I have
Oh
a
yeah.
hard time caring about it. Lastly, as we conclude, just for you, this is a super broad question, but I always find people's answers interesting. As you look at like Christian men today and the different things that they're going through, or just where they're at, if you could like in this moment just say anything or give any advice or just have anything that you would want to say, what would that be?
Stop following men that aren't your elders or your pastors.
Mm,
Um, and I don't just mean that like don't follow Joe Rogan. That's not what I'm saying. A lot of times, guys and like Christian men can tend to venerate, celebrity pastors or people
mm,
like that, people they don't know, and people that don't know them. And there's a lot of guys out there that give very particular advice, that is very much opinion based
mm,
and is not helpful. There's a lot of people that have a lot of hot takes about very specific things that the Bible isn't very specific about. And so
uh,
therefore, I feel like they're kind of speaking out of turn. And I've seen it really steer a lot of guys in the wrong direction, get them focusing on the wrong things, get them structuring their households ways that are not good.
mm,
And really, you first and foremost, a man needs to be sure what the Bible says about what it means to be a man, and then look at the men of the Bible that are praised. And the reality is, it's none of the ones that aren't God. Um,
mm,
all they're all of all of the men that you see in the scriptures. I mean, maybe apart from maybe the apostle Paul or Peter, but even them, like their weaknesses are exposed, right? We
mm,
see what their weaknesses are, and really the ways in which we are to look up to them, is seeing um, really them recognizing the reality of their need, but seeing how Jesus has met that need, and
mm,
giving him all the credit for it. Um, being weak and honest. Any man that can admit his faults, but can admit that there is grace for those faults, is a man who will be well served. Um, so yeah, I just the that first point I made really is something I feel pretty strongly about, because I've just seen it be pretty disastrous,
Mm,
reading everybody's books, but you don't know the men in your church, and they don't know you.
mm,
And it's just, I feel like, and also everybody wants an answer to everything.
yeah.
There isn't one answer to everything.
Mm,
There isn't one way to love your wife. There isn't one way to father your children. There isn't one way to run your household.
mm,
There isn't. There are principles. Learn the principles and then apply them with wisdom. Um, because I think a lot of the advice that's out there with the celebrity type pastors, or at least people out there who are saying this is how to run your family, a
yeah.
lot of times give you they just tell you what they do.
Hmm.
And to me, it makes me kind of the concept makes me want to throw up, which is basically going like, I do this really well, so you should do it how I do it. Give people principles and wisdom, and let God be the one to guide them in how they make their decisions. Um, because really, at the end of the day, um, you know, you want to be shepherded by Christ and through the under shepherds at your church, which are the elders.
Mm,
Um, but if you don't know what the good shepherd says, then you're going to be no good to anyone. So
mm,
go know those things first. Know what God tells you first, and then proceed.
mm. That's so helpful. I think, well, especially because a lot of dudes in my life that I've seen who are like guys who care about Jesus, care about the Bible, like they seem like, I don't know, they should be doing solid stuff, often are not like plugged into church at all. And it's so interesting to see that and be like, what is going on? And so for you to highlight that and be like, hey, like make sure you figure out what God cares about. And then also like make sure you've got an actual community of people who are real, who can actually help you figure out what it means to follow Jesus, and you can
Yeah,
help them. That's
most men, it's interesting to me is, they want to go out and be the doers. But one of the things we're told to do is to not forsake the gathering of the saints.
mm,
And to me, also, a real man is not afraid to be told when to be around people who are just going to tell you the truth. I wanted to
mm,
be around other men who are not just going to say, "Oh, Steve, you're the best, and you never do anything wrong. Your band is so cool." I want to be around people who actually care about, like, if I'm wrong, they disagree with me and tell me why I'm
mm,
wrong, or say, "Hey, like, I'm concerned about maybe this." Um, to not have the humility to want to place yourself in that position, you don't want to be a man. You want to be a dictator. You want to be
mm,
autonomous. You're not. Nobody is. And so, um yeah, there's so much false masculinity in the world, and I believe just as much in the church, um because really we're just forsaking a lot of the simple things that God's word tells us, that we all need church leadership that God has designed. We all need to be a part of a church, be fellowshipping with people, and through that, God will work and use those means,
mm.
to help grow you. And so those are like simple things that so many people neglect.
Yeah,
So
totally. Stephen, I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on again. Because one, I do really like talking with you. I find your thoughts really interesting. But two, I think this is going to actually be super helpful to a lot of people. So thank you again for being gracious, for coming on here, for talking about your album a bit and some other things. Seriously, I think it was 2 albums ago, I think in a video you guys were like, we didn't know if this would be like the last album or if we'd ever do it again. So I hope that that's not the case and that it keeps going. So for those of you listening and you want to support the band, the best way you can do it is actually buy the music, because he's right. There's not a lot of money to be made in music. So I would encourage you all to go and buy it if you want to support them and the stuff they're doing. Again, thank you for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, thanks, man.